So hello everyone. My report will be the risk matrix and also assessing risk and its control types. So let's start with the risk matrix. The risk matrix is a widely used and highly effective tool to record and analyze the objectives, risks, and controls in the program or process that is being audited. The risk matrix is an essential ingredient when conducting risk-based audits as they provide a means to capture and analyze these items. So, yung risk matrix daw is isang tool na ginagamit during risk assessment and also risk-based audits para ma-evaluate both likelihood and consequences that will help the management and auditors to have a better decision making. So this is an example of risk matrix. A risk matrix is a table or grid with the measurement of likelihood on one side and consequence on the other, graded from low to high. The combination of the two, the overall level of risk, can be categorized as low, medium, and high. So, sabi dyan, a risk matrix is a table or grid, that is a table or grid, with the measurement of likelihood on one side and consequence on the other. They're both graded from high to from low to high rather. So the combination of these two, the likelihood and consequence, that will be the overall level of risk. And the overall level of risk can be categorized as low, medium, and high, and they are color coded. So this is an example of using risk matrix. So let me explain this first. High likelihood means expected in most circumstances. So, pwedeng madalas nangyayari or palaging mangyayari, ganun. The low likelihood, the low likelihood occurs very rarely. So, pwedeng hindi siya nangyayari or pwedeng minsan-minsan lang. So, the high consequence means multiple deaths or fatalities. And the low consequence means minor injuries. Pwedeng zero to minor injuries. So, let's have an example. Let's example you crossing the road. Let's say, papasok ka sa trabaho and tatawid ka. So, let's say every 3 minutes may puro bike lang yung dumadaan and every 3 minutes lang may dumadaan. So, the likelihood na masasagasaan ka is low and the consequence na pag nasagasaan ka is also low. So, kung saan sila magmi-meet, which is green, that means the overall level of risk is low. Now, let's say naman na maraming bike yung dumadaan. So, the likelihood na masasagasaan ka is high, and then the consequence will be low since it will only cause you minor injuries. So, saan sila nag-meet? Sa yellow, which means the overall level of risk is medium. Now, let's say naman trucks. Madaming dumadaan na trucks. So, the likelihood of you getting hit by a truck is high, and then the consequence is high. So, saan sila magmi-meet? Sa red. So, that means the overall level of risk is high. So, madaming example pa ng risk matrix. Hindi lang ganito yung itsura niya. Marami pa siyang itsura. Pero this is the common one. Let's move on. So, assessing risk and control types. So, before we go ahead with that, let's figure out kung ano yung pinagkaiba ni risk assessment at ni risk management. So, si risk assessment is primarily concerned with the identification and analysis phase, while risk management is the continuing process to identify, analyze, and treat loss exposures, and monitor risk, control, and financial resources to mitigate the adverse effect of loss. It is as the identification, analysis, treatment, and monitoring of risk. So, para mas maintindihan natin kung yung pinagkaiba nila, let's look at it this way. So, si risk assessment tsaka si risk management, partners sila. So partners sila. Pwede natin din sabihin na si risk assessment, siya yung information ng risk. While si risk management, siya naman yung plano kung paano ma-reduce yung risk or kung paano mapipigilan. So, without risk assessment, kung walang risk assessment, hindi natin alam kung ano yung risk na ilalagay natin sa risk management natin. So, that is why they are partners. they are also unique. Yung risk assessment and yung risk management, unique yan sa company mo. So every company has different assessment and also management. Now let's move on. Risk assessment. Risk assessment is a process that is often done iteratively. So, when we say iteratively, repeated. Why? Dahil sa isang company or business or management, madaming risk na pwede ma-encounter. And ang goal dito ay malaman natin yung different outcome na different risk. That's why repetition siya. Kasi maraming pwede maging outcome. And yun yung habol natin to know the different outcomes. The process begins by identifying potential hazards and analyzing those items to determine what could happen if the hazard were to occur. So, nagsisimula siya by identifying the hazards or yung panganib. Then, with that information, i-analyze natin yon para malaman natin kung anong pwedeng mangyari or yung possible outcome na mangyayari if nangyari na yung hazard na sinasabi natin. So, next is an important aspect of risk assessment is identifying and quantifying the assets that are at risk. So, sinasabi dyan na yung importanteng aspect ng risk assessment is to identify, meaning makilala natin or malaman natin, and quantify and mabilang natin yung assets natin na at risk. So, yung asset hindi lang siya like money or like the buildings or property or inventory ng company natin. Yung reputation, health ng employee mo, ikaw, and also yung customers mo, mahalaga din siya. Kaya, ayun, pantay-pantay sila ng importansya. So, the conduct of a risk assessment means that we should look for the weakness that would make an asset susceptible to damage or loss from the hazard. So, ibig sabihin niyan is nagko-conduct tayo ng risk assessment para makita natin yung weakness ng company natin and also ng mga assets na kapitin sa damage and may possibility na mawala or masira dahil sa hazard. Now, let's move on. Risk identification methods. So, we have 4 risk identification methods. So, first is objective-based. This is identify events that may hinder the ability of the organization to achieve its objectives partially or completely. Ibig sabihin yan, nag-identify tayo ng events na pwedeng makahadlang or makasira sa ability natin, ng organization natin, na ma-achieve yung objectives ng isang company. Scenario-based. This is create different scenarios or alternative ways of achieving objectives and determine how forces interact. So, sa scenario-based, gumagawa tayo ng iba't ibang scenario. And yung scenario na ito, pwede siyang alternative way para ma-achieve yung goal or objectives ng management. Any event that triggers an undesired scenarios, alternative is identified as risk. Okay. Common risk checking. Use a prefabricated list of common risks in your industry or area of scope. So, yung common risk checking sa ibang industry, may parang listahan na silang ginagawa. And nilalagay nila yung mga known risk or yung mga risk na talagang possible mangyari. So, may example ako later. But, before that, we move on to risk charting. So, risk charting, this is a combination of above approaches consists of listing resources at risk and the threats to those resources. So, yung risk charting daw, ito yung combination nitong tatlo ng objective, scenario, and common risk checking. And, pwede natin na example dito is yung risk matrix. Meron pa ibang examples, pero the risk matrix, ito din yun, parang yun yung number 1 example ng risk charting. Now, this is an example of common risk checking. No? So, we have 5 hazards. So, that is the natural, human, mechanical, technological, and logistics. Now, let's go to hazard. So, let's go to natural. So, yung natural, this is known as the natural disasters, yung mga di natin napipigilan na dadating. So this is the floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, temperature, pandemic, and contamination. Sa humans naman, we have two. Yung unintentional, hindi sinasadya, and then the intentional, yung mga sinasadya, or pwede rin planado. Unintentional, this is the poorly operated equipment, unsafe work procedures, fatigue, lack of training, and distractions. So, yeah. And then, the intentional, ito yung workplace violence, strikes, arson, and fraud. Pag sinabi natin strikes, ito usually means physical violence, no, sa workplace. Now, let's go to mechanical hazard. So, this is the poorly placed or installed equipment, outdated equipment, structural failure, and mechanical breakdown, and hazardous materials. Technological hazards. This is the loss of connectivity and corrupted data. So, I'm pretty sure na-experience na natin yung loss of connectivity and corrupted data. So, na-experience din yun ng ibang companies or organizations. Logistics. This is supplier disruption and transportation interruption. When we say disruptions, ibig sabihin nun breakdown ng production and distribution ng supplies or from galing sa suppliers. Now, let's go with the different department and organizations. Kung makikita nyo sa ating handouts, meron dyang mga different services and agencies or department na nakakatulong. Pero kasi puro sa US siya, no? So, nag-search ako ng parang similar departments na makikita dito sa Pilipinas. So, the Department of Disaster Resilience. So, this is a DDR. Actually, hindi pa talaga siya nabubuo, pero na-aprubahan na siya. So, yung DDR naman, sila yung responsible for leading, managing, and organizing national efforts to prevent and reduce disaster risk. So, yun, responsibility nila na makatulong sa economy, not economy, but the environment rather, para para ma-reduce natin yung mga disaster risk. So, sila yung nangunguna doon. So, yung Philbox naman, sila naman nagpo-provide ng information sa mga activities ng volcanoes, earthquake, and also tsunamis. So, may mga companies na, let's say, malapit sa mga fault line or malapit sa mga dagat na if there are a warning of earthquake or tsunamis, pwedeng ma-identify, parang mag-give ng alert si Philbox. Pag-asa. So, yung Pag-asa naman, we are aware naman na they provide flood and typhoon warnings. Tsaka, nagbibigay din sila ng public weather forecast and also advisories. Yung DNR naman, sila naman responsible for the parang conservation sa pagmamanage and development and also proper use ng country ng proper use ng environment and natural resources ng company natin ng country natin rather. So these are some few. Meron din tayong batas para sa workplace violence. Now let's move on. So this is the relationship of hazard assets at risk and organizational impact. So now let's say we can say na pagka mataas yung impact, so dapat yung organization they should consider creating a mitigation strategy. Ano ba yung mitigation strategy? Ito yung gagawa ka ng steps or ng plano para ma-reduce yung risk ng company mo. So, if the impact is medium or low, then the control activities are often enough. So, usually, minsan parang improvement na lang yung ginagawa pagka low to medium. So, yung risk assessment with the identification of hazards, ayan, yung mga hazards na ito, tsaka assets at risk, kung kung ano yung matatamaan ng hazards, and also yung impact analysis, kung ano yung parang pwede impact nito sa business natin. Makakatulong siya sa organization natin para ma-increase yung parang likelihood na ma-achieve natin yung goals natin. So, yung mga organizations dapat resilient sila. So, ibig sabihin parang dapat patuloy lang silang nag-iisip na way to improve their control activities and also their companies na din. No? So, dapat so yung technology natin nag improve dapat yung company, yung knowledge din ng company about this technology nag improve din. So, let's go with hazard. So, cyber attacks. So, ano ba yung asset at risk dito? Which is the property. Now, ano ba yung impact ng cyber attack sa atin? Property damage. Now, let's go to supplier failure. Now, pagka nagkaroon ng failure sa supplier natin or sa supplies, ano yung asset at risk natin, which is the people and also the property. Ang magiging impact dito is financial loss, which is, ayun, mawalan tayo ng kita or mababawasan. Mababa, ganun. Mechanical breakdown. Pag may nangyaring ganyan, ang asset at risk natin is the system. And then the impact naman nun sa atin is the loss of customers. Another hazard is utility outage. Ang asset at risk dito is yung machineries. And then, pagkalik biglaang nagkaroon ng ganyan na outage, usually, ikaw or employee mo yung magkakaroon ng injury, ganun. So, pandemic, no, we are familiar with that. Ano yung assets at risk, reputation, and the people. Ano yung magiging impact sa atin? Yung contamination. Yan. Yung hazardous material spill naman, magiging asset at risk dito is yung environment. Not just the environment, pero the people within that environment din. So, pag meron tayong like, for example, pag may ganyang nangyari, pwede tayong magkaroon ng fines and penalties. Terrorism. Ang asset at risk dito, property and people. The impact will be lawsuits and personal injury. The last one is fire explosion, structural collapse. So, the asset at risk dito, if not all, no, ito yung parang pinakang matatamaan, which is the property, people, and the machineries. Impact, this is the loss of confidence in the organization and also financial loss. Kasi, pag sinabi nating lalo na to, structural collapse, lahat talaga maapektuhan. Mahirap mag-start, ganun. That's why you tend to lose confidence in your business or organization if that happens. So, that is my report. I hope everyone understands it. Thank you.